Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Security threats are everywhere. But with Xfinity XFi, you're notified of threats to your in-home Wi-Fi network, so all your connected devices are protected. That's simple, easy, awesome. Go online, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit today. Restrictions apply.
The kind of old-fashioned cop who preferred working the streets and making arrests to taking tests toward promotion. He was the closest thing New York had to a Dirty Harry.
This is One Tough Podcast on the OG Podcast Network. Here's your host, Bo Dietl.
Welcome to One Tough Podcast. I'm here joined, like always, with Carlo.
Privet, как дела?
Who? What'd you say?
I was just in case anyone Russian's listening.
Oh my God, Carlo, you never surprise me. Today we have you're a doctor?
I did my PhD. Yeah.
Oh, well, excuse me, you got a PhD, Carlo?
No.
You ain't got one, so I'm going to call you doctor. How about Dr. Carter Page? Dr. Page, boy, you're putting doctor ahead of everything here. Mr. Page is a petroleum industry consultant. What does that mean?
Well, I've had an investment firm in the energy industry, so some investment, some.
And you're a former advisor to President Trump in the 2016 campaign.
I actually was a member of the campaign foreign policy committee, but I actually never met Mr. Donald J. Trump.
Well, you're kind of famous because of this whole nonsense, and it's the miscarriage of this whole FISA warrant when they were eavesdropping on you, and this is probably one of the most interesting things because they investigated this up, around, and sideways, and if there was any evidence that you did something wrong, I'm sure you would have been indicted and you would have been prosecuted, but for some reason, oops, there's nothing there. And let's talk a little bit about your foundation, your base in life. You're a graduate of our esteemed Naval Academy?
Yes, 1993.
My friend Ed Straw is a veteran. Yeah, Ed's a good friend of mine.
Great guy.
Three-star admiral, used to head up St. Lauder.
Give him my best. I haven't seen him for a while.
Well, he's got a house down there on the lake.
Yeah.
And I talk to Ed all the time.
Yeah,
and
give him my best.
You left the Navy. Did you went right to work for Merrill Lynch?
No, I actually was a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations here in New York for a year and worked at a tech startup for about another year and then joined in 2000. Right,
and then you found your own company there, Global Energy Capital. Yes. What was that?
So it's an investment firm focused on the energy sector in developing markets.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you then were traveling a lot to Russia?
Yes, I've spent a lot of time there over the years. I actually, in 2004, me and another guy opened the Merrill Lynch's office in Moscow. In 1998, when the emerging markets financial crisis occurred, Merrill was one of the few banks that totally closed down in Russia. And so 2004, it's the fastest growth market in the world. And they're like, oh, we better get back in. So me and another guy went over
Carter,
to open the office.
Were you ever approached to be an operative, a CIA operative? Well, let me tell you back why I'm asking that question. Mm-hmm. I was approached with all my investigations worldwide upon retirement, and I actually met with operatives who wanted to recruit me into the CIA. I can say it openly because I never went in there and I don't really care. Were you ever approached with all your travelings to Russia, me as a station chief, I know this Carter Page, military man, you'd be a perfect person.
Well, Bo, typically I would not talk about that, but unfortunately the criminal leakers in the U.S. intelligence community and some of their colleagues ended up leaking that information. So,
well, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I was,
yes. Yeah. So the answer, it's been in some news stories over the last few years.
Right,
but,
right.
I was revealed as being a source both for the CIA but also for the FBI.
But also for the United States of America.
Absolutely.
You're a patriot.
Absolutely.
You're not a double spy. You're a patriot. And that's exactly why I really wanted you to be here, because you're friends with my dear friend Sean Hannity. And Sean Hannity, to me, walks on water. And he's a great American, great patriot. I love Sean. And that's why I really wanted you on here to talk to you a little about the miscarriage of justice that's been prevailed upon you.
Well, there's some heroes that Sean values more than anyone, and way up there, at the very top of that pinnacle is law enforcement, and the great, amazing accomplishments you've had throughout your career. I can understand why you two would be.
We're going to get into the meat of why you're here.
Yeah.
Here's the story. All of a sudden, I get a contact in the 1990s. Carlo don't even know it. So I meet this guy who is a CIA station chief, and he goes, "Bo, you do investigations worldwide. What a great cover it could be for you going into the Middle East and all that." I said, "Really?" So I used to do IMUS in the morning.
Yes.
So I did it for 34 years. So all of a sudden he has me. I get a phone call from someone, meet under the clock in the Waldorf Astoria. They used to have a clock there.
I remember
Peacock
it. Right in
Alley.
the middle in the
right,
reception.
And I go there and I'm sitting there, 5 o'clock, I'm waiting, right? All of a sudden this lady was about 5 foot tall. She goes, "Bo Dietl." I look at a little lady, 5 foot tall. "Yeah, Bo Dietl." And she whips out this CIA bifolder, and she says, "Okay, I've come to meet you." Now she's talking to me, asking me all kinds of questions. And I said, "Look, for this country, I would kill I'd kill for this country. I love this country. I'm a patriot. To help this country, I'll do anything," right? And years ago, I used to do the bodyguard work for the royal family of Saudi Arabia while I was on the force in New York. So I've been to Saudi Arabia 24 times with all these abba-dabba-doos, and I kind of know the whole act over there and the hypocriticalness of what that's all about. So I felt kind of cool. I'm not afraid of anything. So, I could be over there and I could do what I got to. Next thing is I go on IMUS the next day. And IMUS said, "Bo, why are you acting so cocky?" I said, "I can't tell you. I can't tell you." So he squeezed it out of me. Yeah. And I said, "Well, I meant to put it this way. I never heard from him after that. We did a live show, and I mentioned they wanted me to be a CIA operative in the Middle East. I never heard from him. They probably said, this son of a bitch can't even keep a secret from one day to the other. We can't make him a CIA operative." And that was my CIA involvement. But kind of funny, right?
It's funny, Bo, but it's sad because unfortunately what we have is some of the top people in law enforcement, during the Obama administration in our country. Some of these top people decided that it's more important, what's more important? It's a similar dichotomy, right? In terms of, real intelligence operation on the one side versus, media operations. And these people, in the top level of the Obama administration's intelligence community really decided that media is more important by their actions and how they've handled themselves in the year since. And, the best example is former director of national intelligence. Well, Brennan, he's on MSNBC. Clapper is
Clapper
on,
and Brennan, two dickheads who were in the area of national intelligence to be on these shows flapping their lips like this. That's a horror. And then all of a sudden this whole development of whatever Trump is, we have to take him out. No matter if we violate or we commit crimes, we got to take him down. And this to me is just such a friggin' outrage. Now, back in 2016, with this Yahoo report on you, with this other Russian guy, what was that about?
So that was written by Michael Isikoff. Isikoff, and that was sourced by Christopher Steele.
Yes.
And that was the source that the FBI used to apply for a FISA warrant against you.
Well, there are a couple of sources. They had this big DNC, Democrat National Committee, opposition research, intelligence project by this group called Fusion GPS. So Fusion GPS so that article you just referenced came out on September 23rd, 2016, about 45 days before the election. For the 2 months prior, I was getting calls from every news agency you can imagine. New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, long list. And they kept pitching the same stupid idea that, are you colluding with these Russian, high-level Russians? Neither of these same two names that I keep hearing, I had never heard in my entire life. Or, well, I knew of one, but, the other guy I hadn't even heard of, and I've never ever met him in my life. So finally, after Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele are trying to push this fake news out there.
Let the audience, because I want my listening audience to understand. They hear excerpts, they go around the channels, they listen to the bullshit on CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS. These are going to be the facts of this whole case, because this is so important to get the facts out there. I know that everyone that listens to our podcast doesn't tune into Fox, because Fox is the one that tells it like it is. But this is for the other listeners to understand what the hell is going on with Mr. Carter here and what's going on with this whole fusion thing. This guy Steele was brought up to be, by the FBI, one of the most unreliable people. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And really, what they were doing, and this goes back to what we were just debating about, intelligence operations on the one side, but also media operations on the other. And he was paid large sums of money in 2016 by the Democrat Party to,
develop dirt on Trump.
Develop that dirt, but also to distribute dirt, which is,
he was hired to get it out there. There was some talk back then. I remember, because I was involved with the election with crazy Steve Bannon. I used to go over there and meet with Steve Bannon at the headquarters over there for Trump. And the part of the thing was, there was a word out there that they had Russian operatives that had sheets, that there was golden showers with hookers in Moscow. And I know Donald 40 years. This guy's a germophobic. No one's taking a pee on the president, and he ain't going to be around there. So as soon as I heard that, I said, what a bunch of bullshit this is. Yeah. And that was my first time that I actually realized there's an effort by the Democratic Party to take him down no matter what. Oh, they got blackmail on him because they peed on some chicks or something like that. And anything in the world that they could do or say, they would do to take him down.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And going back to the sequence and the timing of things, those false allegations came out on about over 3 months later, on January 10th, 2017.
After the president was elected.
Well, after he's elected, but 10 days before the inauguration, they published this entire dodgy dossier, which has the full 35 pages. The difference before the election, they only came after one person. These false allegations of colluding with the Russians in terms of doing oil deals and being involved in the hacking, alleged hacking, that all came down on me. So, unfortunately. But again, they do it as a way to take down candidate Trump.
So in other words, they were trying to say Dr. Carter Page was involved with the Russians, telling the Russians, don't worry about these economic sanctions with the oil and gas. And when Donald becomes the president, don't worry about it. And is that exactly basically what they're attributing to?
Yeah,
being the go-in-between, being the representative, President Trump, to the Russians. Don't worry about Igor. Don't worry about none. After the election, we got this thing taken care of. We'll get rid of these sanctions. That's what they're alleging. Am I correct?
You got it, Bo. But there's alongside that, this before the election and after the election, one of the big miscalculations by the Democrats and the U.S. intelligence community was, well, we have this operation going in terms of this false narrative, these false, defamatory stories we're putting out there about myself and President Trump or candidate Trump. But what they didn't expect is that he was going to actually win in November of 2016.
Yeah, that would have been shit canned and would have been all over. But they didn't realize when he won, and I was there election night in the Hilton.
Oh, wow.
And I was there. It was like a Rocky movie when we started winning all this day. And then it went, oh, my God. And then we heard with these alleged professionals from the FBI, the attorney, ugly woman there, and her boyfriend there, ugly boy. And what they were talking about was any way that they could take Trump down. They don't care. They tried the Russian collusion. It didn't work. Now we're into Ukraine. So this is just an ongoing battle that'll never stop. And the problem here is majority of the news media will not publish what we're talking about now because what it is, it's a concerted effort to block it. And I saw that little creep at the Yankee game, and I said to him, I says, you know what, you should get me on your little CNN with that other guy, Chris Cuomo. You need another side of the truth here. And his name is Zucker, and he had his two sons. I wanted to be nice to him. I was going to curse at him, but I wouldn't do it in front of his sons. He's like a little weeble. You know what a weeble is? You knock him down, he pops up. But the point is that this is something that I love the audience to listen to because this is the facts of what really transpired. And continue, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, it really, the saddest part about it is, and actually 2 days later after that article came out from Yahoo News on Friday, September 23rd, 2016, I sent a letter to then FBI Director James Comey. Explaining what a complete joke these false allegations are. And, what I mentioned in the letter is, it's obvious how foolish this fake story is. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I know the great work the FBI and law enforcement does to keep our country safe.
Yeah.
And, it's important that they are starting to get back to work on more important things. And that, to me, is the biggest tragedy. Instead of wasting tens of millions of dollars, countless law enforcement hours of, all the time for these great individuals, on this complete witch hunt, then, it's a lot better.
I got to compliment you on the thing. It was, I think, October 17th when the Senate committee wanted to bring you in there. And I'll be very honest, and we've seen what happened to a great general. We've seen what happened. In reality, perjury, when you're under conversation, you're under oath, perjury could be constituted in many ways. And you could be tricked into stating something that not intentionally you're saying, but you say, and it will constitute perjury. So that was a smart move not to go in there unless you had complete immunity on top of immunity.
Well, you raise an interesting point, Bo, and actually things evolved over time. And to me, the biggest goal throughout all of this is to get, and it's along the lines of what you do day in and day out on in the media, is try to get the truth out there. And so finally, originally I was pushing back at Senate Intelligence Committee because I knew how corrupt many of the members of that in their whole operation was. But, eventually I did it and went ahead and testified. But what was interesting, in March of 2017, so I sent that letter in September of 2016 to FBI Director Comey.
Never heard from him. Never heard from him
for over 5 months. In early March of 2017, after the inauguration, a couple of FBI agents walk up to me. And typically when I'd helped the FBI and CIA before, they'd call me up in advance and we'd sort of arrange a meeting somewhere. And this time they just kind of came up to me. So, it's obvious they're tracking me and knowing exactly where we are. But so we ended up spending a few, over 10 hours together, throughout the month of March. And
hold on a second, like the listeners, when they did the FISA warrant, when they were tapping your phones and tapping all your shit, when did that start?
So less than a month after that September 23rd, 2016 article came out, on October 21st, 2016, just
right before the election.
A couple weeks before the election, they got the first FISA warrant.
So they started
affidavit.
tapping you right before the election.
Yes.
And how long did they, in your knowledge, did they do that?
So the final warrant affidavit was signed late June 2017. So they were basically doing it for a year.
How often do they have to re-up that FISA?
It's a 90-day process. They did it. They did it in October. They did it just before the election.
Didn't they have to bring new information to re it up again? That they got something?
I think you're getting close to some of the things that the great Republicans in Congress, like Chairman Lindsey Graham of the Senate Judiciary and Congressman Devin Nunes of House Intelligence. It's some of the reasons why they've been, focusing in on some areas, my understanding.
A little slow on the draw here.
Well, it's they're up against some very strong forces, and I've been fighting those same forces myself. But the reason why that final FISA affidavit, which was signed by Rod Rosenstein, then the Deputy Attorney General, in June of 2017 is, there was some additional information, going back to your point. They're wiretapping me for 9 months, and they don't find any information, essentially, because I've been totally clean. And so they have to kind of come up with some new dirt, and so that is some of the worst information, is my understanding.
Yeah, but that's like if I put a tap on you, right? When I used to be a detective, you have to go before a court. You have an informant giving you information. You swear to it. You have to show credibility for the warrant. And then even when you're on a warrant, you have to turn it off if it's not pertaining to the subject of what the warrant's for. Is that the same thing with the FISA?
Well, it's interesting. So finally, and there's so many laws. We could talk for the next day about all the laws broken in this process, Bo. But there was one, there were some specific, they ended up finally declassifying, a highly redacted version of my 4 FISA affidavits in last July 2018.
Of what was said by you about tapped.
Well, but, it's what they're saying was said by me and what the other false evidence that they're submitting to the court of law, in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in Washington. So what's interesting, if you look at those affidavits, you can find
some that pages and pages are just blacked out.
Well, you're absolutely right, Carlo, but there's a lot of, the main applications, which were put together by the DOJ and the FBI, they're pretty heavily blacked out. But at the end of those 4 warrants are actually the order signed by the judges, 4 judges, right? Those are entirely blacked out. And so that gets to your question of, what were they allowing?
Right.
And, my theory as to why the judges' orders are completely blacked out is because if they gave any information whatsoever about what these judges got finagled into, authorizing, those judges would have to stand up for themselves.
Problem, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of problems that are still coming down.
As far as when you get these warrants, if you have a certain topic that you're listening for, you can't have a broad base. If he's talking about having sex with some gal, they're supposed to shut that off. That has nothing to pertain to what they're listening for. And I don't know if that's the same with the FISA warrant.
Well, there's a lot of different, it's like going into a restaurant and there's a lot of different things on the menu. And so that's what they ended up getting authorized is what the selections were in the menu. And that's what's in those 4.
And that's what's blacked out.
Yeah, that's what
activity.
Entirely blacked out.
And also
the understanding
officer that applied for it is also blacked out. So
but the officers, what we do know are people, the high level, and this goes back to the corruption within the DOJ and the FBI during the Obama administration, which, some of these people ended up sticking around into the Trump administration.
That's his biggest problem, is he didn't clean house. And even with the informants in the White House, you've got people that are still embedded that are leaking a lot of information. We see the leaks occurring every day. Now, when you are not charged with anything, which you weren't, and they were listed for 9 months, 9 months?
12 totally.
12 months.
Yep.
And they didn't have shit.
Yep.
Because if they had something, you would have been indicted.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. That actually goes to the, I was starting to say with those March 2017 meetings when the FBI came to me and I met with them the 5 times. I said to the first couple times we sat down, first couple meetings, they would say to me, well, we're just having a conversation here. And I remember they said this at least a couple times.
You're not a target.
Well,
they tell you that, right?
Something more to the point of what you're just making. They said, you're not under oath. Yeah. I'm like, well, listen.
If you lie to an FBI agent, you're under oath.
Well,
make a false statement to a federal agent. Even if the dates don't line up with whatever you're saying.
Yes, you're absolutely right. But here was my response to them whenever they said that. And this is probably why they kind of stopped saying it at the end of the day. They said, I said to them, I'm a Naval Academy graduate. And ever since I went to that institution, I've lived by the honor code. You don't lie, cheat, or steal. And whether I'm talking to you or whether I'm talking to Anderson Cooper on CNN or Chris Hayes on MSNBC or, any of these, George Stephanopoulos, wherever, I don't, I tell the truth. I'm going to give the truth. So they were a little, I could sense a little disappointment. And some people in Congress were trying that as well in my many hours. In total, I probably spent around 40 hours of various interrogations throughout this entire process.
And obviously they came up with shit.
They couldn't find anything, and then so they had to make up stuff instead.
But I love,
and again, from the very beginning, it was made up. So
now, what's his name? Papadopoulos there. What's his name there?
George Papadopoulos.
Yeah. Did you know him?
So that's an interesting question because I had very little interaction with him at all. He asked to have a Skype call early, right when we got when our committee was announced. And so, I talked with him a few minutes on the phone. I can't even remember. We had some of the best
He was on
people.
that same committee on the election?
We had a large committee of people who were, volunteers.
Experts in
foreign policy. Foreign policy, yes, and national security. Mm-hmm. And on the national security front, some of the best people I've ever, I've been in the foreign policy, international relations world for many decades. And, as part of my work in the military.
And you're apolitical.
Well,
I mean, that's part of that my experience is they are apolitical.
Yes.
They're not a Democrat or Republican. They're a professional person.
Until 2016, and these people, some of the people in the establishment who don't like some of the new ideas, the important changes.
No, the important changes are gutting out all the corruption and all the lobbyists and all the waste in this government. And they want business as usual because all these lobbyists are taking care of them. And that's why they hate President Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
Simple.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And, some of the best people in the foreign policy world that I've ever dealt with in my life were members of that committee. And the vast majority of them, and people haven't really stopped to think about this, but there were some, the vast majority of us were U.S. military veterans. Some top generals, Army, Air Force, Marine generals were on that committee, as well as, a few Navy admirals as well. And, dealing with, these are really the people I gravitated towards and, spend a lot of time with. And it was really a shame, because eventually after those articles came out, I had to take a leave of absence, just given all the craziness. And, breaking up, you talk about election interference, breaking up our committee like that, causing this interference for the policy making, idea generation we were working on is really one of the most
you were
tragic.
there to steer this president, if he won, into a direction of a good policy for the country.
Well, I was a small, I was a small lieutenant, amongst some really great generals in this important process. And, unfortunately, my ability to contribute and their ability to sort of have an open debate, I think was really unfortunate.
Got a question. If it's off base, let me know. You don't have to answer it. WikiLeaks. Did you ever know him? Have you ever spoken to him?
I never knew. The things I heard about that were just things I heard about in the news.
You never had any involvement with
Not only did I never have any involvement, no one in Russia, because I spent some time. I spent a lot of time in Russia.
Supposedly he was getting information from all these Russian sources.
None of the Russians I've met ever knew anything about it as well. Again, some of the news stories, once they've already been made public, were interesting to everyone, right? Because, again, they uncovered a lot of, shady practices that the Democrats were doing. But.
Right, and I mean, and a lot of things, they throw misleading stuff in there to throw you off. Oh, yeah, we have a source in Moscow that would observe this with that in this meeting, and it's total bullshit with no substantiation, but yet you're starting a little bit of a smoldering of a fire.
Absolutely.
And that's basically, look, I've worked on campaigns, my own campaigns, and you develop stuff as far as against the candidate you're running. The same as what Hillary did to Trump. I mean, we found out other stuff. We also found out the information about Hillary being the Secretary of State who was making money with the Swiss banks, being in charge of the Swiss banks, to the settlement. She's the Secretary of State. No one questioned that. Her husband there, $1.5 million to do a friggin' speech for half an hour. I mean, all these things are counter research that you bring out during the campaign. Well, you have a debate. If I'm debating Hillary Clinton, I'd say, Hillary, your husband got $1.5 million Swiss banks. There were 20,000 American accounts there. Why weren't they all released? Why didn't they pay their fair taxes? I mean, these are things you do with information you have and with just as normalcy, no?
Well, here's the difference between those types of standard operations, Bo. Mm-hmm. Again, remember this individual, Christopher Steele, right? Mm-hmm. The guy who was paid large sums of money by the Democrats, right? That person wears a couple of different hats, and he has a couple of different loyalties and shares of cash flow, right?
Money loyalty.
Well, the money loyalty, yes, you're getting exactly to my point. The money loyalty to the politicians, he's getting this money funneled to him by the Democrats. At the same time, in 2016, throughout 2016, he received 11 payments from the FBI. The FBI
the same time he's getting money from Hillary.
Absolutely.
From the DNC.
And the DNC, yep. Yes.
From the FBI also. So this was like a double agent there.
Yep. And, they're
so the FBI had to know that he was doing work for the DNC.
Yes. Well, and what's interesting, and this is sort of some of the testimony which came out, and I've been fighting a long time with the U.S. Department of Justice on this, but one of their top officials in the Obama administration and into the early period of the Trump administration was this guy, Bruce Orr, right?
Yep.
And so his wife, Nellie Orr, worked for Fusion GPS. She was also paid by them, and they were kind of doing this joint dirt operation. And those two, each of them, one from DOJ, one from Fusion GPS, their family, are having ongoing discussions with the
FBI.
Well, with Christopher Steele, and then they were kind of
now,
funneling it back
Steele, you got to bring me up to date. My memory ceases a little bit. How much was he put under oath and question on this whole thing?
Well, it's similar to what you were referring to in terms of the 18 U.S.C. 1001 violations. He had long relations with the FBI and also other, allegedly some, intelligence and U.S. foreign policy groups. So, I don't know about being under oath, but he spent, he definitely had sort of those relationships. And so, he had, at the very least, a contractual, because he was under contract. He was under contract by the FBI, and so at the very least, it's a breach of contract. And actually, I said 11 payments in 2016. Part of the reason is eventually he got fired for these criminal leaks to the media.
So he never testified because he used that as far as his non-testimony?
Well, there's, again, we're getting into sort of tricky legal definitions, but he was definitely feeding fake dirt to the FBI, either both directly as well as indirectly through, like this guy Bruce Orr, who's also whose wife is paid by Fusion. By Fusion.
So I mean, there's your collusion. There, it's right there is your collusion. My problem is this Inspector General report that I've been waiting for. What's up with that? Maybe that guy's in the tank?
Well, it goes back to sort of some of the things you're alluding to, Bo, because there was a news report in Reuters back in June, right? And they said that 3 people from the Office of Inspector General, DOJ people, flew to London in June to go interview Christopher Steele for 2 days, right? And they found him, sufficiently credible. This guy has no credibility whatsoever. So it's really deja vu all over again. We sort of repeating the same bad practices because, you're familiar in given your work in law enforcement and work in the courts as part of your work in law enforcement of the term ex parte.
Yes.
Ex parte means, the person who it's about is totally kept out. And those 4 FISA warrant affidavits, which were fraudulently submitted to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court against me, were all ex parte. Unfortunately, this whole Inspector General report thus far, because it's about the crimes that were committed against myself and against President Trump, so far that has been entirely ex parte as well, right? And it's the same cast of characters. Again, they're playing U.S. taxpayer-funded vacations to Europe for these, 3 people from the Inspector General's office, allegedly, to go hang out with Christopher Steele for a couple of days. But I've offered to provide, input. And I also, by law, the Privacy Act of 1974 says that if there's a system of records, if there are records about an individual, the person has to be able to both, have access to it and also to, if there are corrections and if there are errors, the person's allowed to ask for corrections.
Well,
and I've been begging for this for over 2 years already.
If you're accused of something, you should be able to interrogate the accuser. It's very, very simple. It's normalcy.
Well, unfortunately, no one ever figured this out yet in terms of this Inspector General report.
But I love what you're doing, too. Now, all of a sudden, you've made it a concerted effort to go on to the attack with your lawsuits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this most recent one yesterday, is really getting to that Privacy Act issue.
Why don't we talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, in again, May of 2017, I submitted a request to the Department of Justice for the system of records about myself.
Which you should
these
have
fraudulent,
the right.
which I should have the right. And unfortunately, what they ended up doing, instead of giving me the opportunity to see my records and to edit my records, what did they end up doing in July of 2018 instead? They end up, giving it to the New York Times, the glowing New York Times, which is sort of in the tank for the Democrats.
We know
right?
that.
So they haven't, so that's illicitly given to the New York Times in last year.
Before you were given it.
Before I was ever given, what I had requested for making edits. And I'm making a similar, I've been in ongoing battles with the DOJ, over the last couple of months to try to get access to this new Inspector General report before it smears me and, President Trump again, right? And, again, by law, according to the Privacy Act of 1974, I should be allowed to provide input to that. And, the so-called Office of Privacy and Civil Liberties at DOJ has not given me the opportunity. And so I took them to court yesterday, and I'm going to try to have this battle out.
Well, it's kind of like what's going on with President Trump in the fact that now with this Ukrainian thing, all of a sudden they have witnesses. You have a Democratic, Republican side, Democrat side, but the Republican side is not able to question these witnesses. They're taking all this testimony one-sided on one-sided alleged whistleblower, supposedly your CIA, whatever, whoever it is, but there's not anybody able to question that witness. Where is the rights of the president? I don't understand. So they're going to come up with an impeachment against the president without having the president have his legal team to interrogate, to question the accuser. This to me is like communism. I mean, it's crazy.
You're absolutely right, Bo, but let me add one little piece on top of that, because in coordination with exactly what you're referring to, they also have this massive media operation where all these fake news channels are constantly, they leak whatever side of the story they want, and spin it in a certain way to just do as much damage as possible. And that is, precisely the same thing that they did to candidate Trump and myself during 2016. And they're just following the same formula now.
Like even we were talking the other day while I was with the president about a month and a half ago on Long Island. And he mentioned about something that I gave him an idea about in 2016. I said, veterans should be able to go to any doctor, any hospital, because they get treated like shit by these VA hospitals. And I said, not Mr. President, I said, Donald, he wasn't the president yet. Why don't they come out with a VA card where they could go to any doctor, any hospital, give the bill to the VA? Sure enough, it's called Veterans Choice. But did you see it in the news? That's been passed. It has not been in the news media. Anything that this president does that's a positive thing, they will not give them the unemployment records, the jobs. They just will not release anything positive. It's I just pray to God that the majority, not the 40% that are his loyal followers, but the other independents don't see through this farce what's going on. Because what's scary is you turn the TV on and all you see is one side, negative Trump. Everything's negative Trump, negative Trump, negative Trump. It's scary. It's scary.
Well, it's not just negative Trump. It's falsely accused Trump as well, right?
No.
I mean, it's all based on lies, one thing right after another.
Yeah. It's at a point right now where you've been victimized. So what are you doing with yourself now? You have to. How do you get this nice tie and suit?
Well, I've been living off savings for the last several years, and I've been, dedicating all my resources to these legal battles to try to reform our justice system and try to get a little bit of justice for us.
President didn't give you off your job?
It's impossible. You look at what happened to General Flynn. Look at these people in the deep state, Department of Justice and FBI are coming after him so aggressively.
Over bullshit.
Over complete, nothing. And it's interesting. Today we should be seeing, sometime this week we should be there. There's been ongoing developments in his General Flynn's case, and I think again, this gets to the bottom of what I keep saying. We just need the truth out there, and I think we're getting, taking some steps to the truth.
But it's too damn slow.
Well, it is too slow, and to your point, the question you're asking about. Working for President Trump, anyone who works for President Trump just gets
target
massive target and just,
and
huge.
Believe me, and you know what? It's like with any politics. They look and they have it already in ammunition. So when someone comes in there, they're ready to hit them, like with that Supreme Court judge, what they did to that poor man.
Or Judge
what he went through, Judge Kavanaugh, was terrible.
Yeah.
I just think that, this Inspector General report just disgusts me. And also, I know the great Senator Lindsey Graham, and I like him very much, but they got to get on the offensive faster than they're doing now. Because if they don't, they're just going to keep eroding, and we're getting weaker. And then we'll have one of these nitwits possibly beat the president. Where do we go? Either the nut from Ben and Jerry's Vermont or the other Hiawatha there, Pocahontas. What choices are there? And what is this country going to really look like if one of these nitwits get elected?
Well, part of it, and again, it's what we've been talking about throughout the show, Bo. There's a big infrastructure, behind each of these large candidates with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of Democrat slush fund money to, advance some of these really dangerous programs.
Right,
and what I and President Trump were targeted on with this Fusion GPS project, which even them, it's a $1 million endeavor, and there's, tons of many millions of dollars beyond that, which were dedicated to this smear campaign. There's a massive infrastructure. There's issues with each of these Democrat candidates on the one hand, but there's also beyond that, large armies,
there is
behind
a deep
that.
state.
Yeah.
But, the other big scary thing, too, as you were talking about politics real fast, is it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, this voter thing, as far as with the president. And, this is going to be a very, very important decision by the Supreme Court as far as with these voting, because I know one thing from experience. When I ran for the United States Congress, there was a lot of cheating done by the Democratic Party in New York with the Board of Elections and all the people that run them, and they control the Board of Elections on a countrywide basis. All these major Democratic-controlled states and cities, they control the Board of Elections. And then when people talk about cheating votes, you cheat 5%, you lose an election. And 5% is not unreasonable, because what they'll do is they'll let people vote. Just let them vote. Why shouldn't you? You have to show ID when you go on a plane. Why shouldn't you have ID to vote? It's one of the most important rights that we have. And they knock it down. They say it's racist to have ID to vote. Why? Either you are the person or you're not. And now they just fog it all up. And to me, it's outrageous.
Well, I know exactly where you're coming from, Bo. And again, this is what's particularly troubling about what they did the last time around with the use of the U.S. intelligence community, because it's following those same tactics of, having people that are supporting them internally within the infrastructure of big government. But, when you start using, the FBI, the CIA, National Security Agency for these operations, it's really problematic.
And what really hurts me is I know a lot of agents and super specialized supervisors there of the FBI, and really hardworking agents, and they've been tarnished by this big bird jerk off Comey. And it's disgusting, because I look upon the FBI as the professional policemen of this country, and how they've been torn apart by these few punks. And I got to call them punks, because they degenerated this great institution that's out there for law enforcement, protecting our country. And now they have to walk around similar to like the New York City Police Department, what this scumbag mayor has done to the police in the police department, where they walk around with their heads down and they can't do their jobs, because every time they do their jobs, they smack them down. It's scary to me. I'm at the end of my rope probably, but I got kids and I got a grandson. I'm afraid for the young people what this country is going to look like. We just had Carlo and I been putting together a editorial page on what's happening in New York State with the criminal justice reform, and now they're coming on January 1st. This moron governor is signing into law criminal reform, where if you get robbed outside, you stab, you're a witness, and you're a complainant, within 15 days they have to release that information to the defense attorney. It's worse. Grand jury testimony, secret testimony, evidence, witnesses, complainant has to be released to the defense attorney within 15 days. Bail is going to be non-existent. Like 98% will have no bail. You could commit a robbery for breakfast, and they'll let you out. They'll give you what they call a desk appearance ticket, and they'll declassify the robbery down to grand larceny, which would be under that catalyst. Then you could get out at 12. You could do a robbery for lunch, and then you'll be a 3 hours desk appearance ticket. That means you go to the station house, you fill it out, you're out. And then you could do one for supper. So you could commit 3 robberies in one day now with this new bill. I mean, where are we going? That's New York State. This is what's being implemented on January 1st. Does anybody understand what the hell are we talking about here? The criminal now, there are some wrong things, like a kid with pot being in jail for 12 months. Look, there are some wrong things with the criminal justice system, which I know about. But you don't take the whole thing apart for little mistakes. You correct those little mistakes. You just don't take the whole catalyst of criminal justice down and destroy complainants and witnesses and the right to prosecute someone who commits a crime against you without the fear of them retaliating against you. How about jurors? They'll be scared stiff to come back with a guilty verdict because the names will be out there. This is what's happening.
Well, and there's so many. I mean, it's important. You're getting into a lot of important technicalities, Bo, and it's important that people understand these policy elements and sort of, get involved in terms of some of these debates. And I my focus over the last few years has been in the intelligence and, national security world. And, I think similarly, there's not enough people getting involved in really understanding and kind of taking action to sort of address
and I'm really
some of these
pissed
issues.
off. I'm really pissed off that there were people who made allegations and said that you are a Russian operative, a Russian asset. You're a great American. You're a patriot. And that pisses me to shit off. If I got accused of that, I don't care if it's Comey, whoever it is, I'd take the arrest for cracking them right in the jaw. You're an American patriot, and you're being treated like someone who is a subversive traitor to this country.
Well, I always keep it in context, Bo, because really, when they were coming after me, they in the end of the day, they were just trying to bring down candidate Trump, then President-elect Trump, and then President Trump.
What you've done in your life for this country now is being tarnished upon the allegation.
Well, our entire country is being tarnished, and to me, that's the biggest concern. And you talk about all the. I mean,
that's like someone. When I was a detective, that's like someone tell me I took money. I never took money. And if you said that about me, I'd take your jaw out. And I mean, that's the way, you must feel inside. They're talking upon you as being an asset for Russia with all this bullshit. That's got to get you inside the gut.
Well, what gets me inside the gut the most is what they've done to take down or try to take down President Trump. And, all of his incredible accomplishments. Someone... that to me is the greatest tragedy. And this is part of the reason why I always use that term dodgy dossier to talk about this, fake intelligence report. The original dodgy dossier was in 2002, 2003. That also came from London, just like Christopher Steele's fake DNC funded report came from London. And this was used as a false premise to start the Iraq War. It was a joint operation.
About the weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it sourced by a bad source?
It was all another fake source.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, this was you're a very interesting guy.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for all your service, too. No, it's been great.
Do send my love to Sean. And if people want to reach out to you, how can they get to you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I think it's Carter W. Page. So there's
and if anybody, Carlo,
or my
so we'll put out a link, include your social media so people can follow your ongoing battle. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are on your side and rooting for you. And you can follow us. We're on social media. We're at One Tough Podcast on Twitter. Bo is at Bo Dietl on Twitter and at The Real Bo Dietl on Instagram. You can also send us any kind of emails you'd like. We're at onetoughpodcast@gmail.com. And we like to wrap up our show with our
we do this little
segment.
thing here. And first of all, if anybody wants to send you some cash, how can they get it to you?
Well, I've been thinking about that. I've been an entrepreneur for people, at some stage I may need to sort of.
Well, you come back on the show, you set something up, and we can maybe get some resources for you.
Okay.
But what we do is every week, me and Carlo, whoever our guest is, we call them Punk of the Week. Now, Punk of the Week could be a situation. It could be anything, somebody that you don't like. I'd like to know what your Punk of the Week is today. Something that really bothered you this week.
Well, to me, it really is what happened with the Privacy Act violations in Department of Justice, and that's why I did my step against the punk practices yesterday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia with filing my lawsuit there. So I'm just really disappointed with the way this Inspector General report has been managed. Do we have a good judge
in that?
I hope so. Yes, Judge
Kantaji.
Fair,
not good. Fair. I like the word fair.
Well, Judge Kantaji Brown Jackson. She was assigned to my case, and actually, she handled the case and convicted. We were talking about Senate Intelligence Committee. James Wolfe, who was giving out the false information about me to a number of young ladies in the media,
in news media.
Yeah,
and
she convicted him, and he's served time for this. So
good. Well, we sound like we have a very fair judge, and we hope that this.
So. Yep.
And now, can you make money on this thing in the sense that you've been wronged on it? What's your damages that you're looking for?
Well, I have a number of things that I'm looking for. First of all, I want the court to recognize, as so many people across the country have recognized, that the Department of Justice has violated the Privacy Acts, right? And I also, want to.
You've been damaged.
Well,
so you should be able to get
reputational damage. Our country has been damaged, and to me, this Inspector General report, which has not really been managed in a correct way thus far in terms of its rollout and the review process, I want to have the ability to review it for accuracy purposes. And then, yes, there may be some actual monetary damages as well. So, but we'll see how it goes.
That's your punk of the week, and that's good. What about you there, Commander? What do you feel?
I think the biggest punk in the whole world right now is the NBA. I think the way that they're handling their China policy and making sure that and none of the players speak out against China, it's a travesty. It's NBA. All our sports are looked upon by the world, and it's a good place to get a message of freedom and democracy out there. And that the NBA is taking money from China and keeping everybody quiet is a disgrace.
Well, you're up on something, because my punk of the week is the country of China for what they do with human rights. And people don't realize they have concentration camps over there. They have people incarcerated just by being not what they like. And if you speak against the government, they go to jail, and they suck. And you know what? America shouldn't be kissing their asses. As far as I'm concerned, they're our biggest enemy. And you know what? They don't have to fire one missile at us. They have ASAT satellites that can be taken out, knocking out our GPS with all the stuff that they've stolen, with all our proprietary stuff. You look at Boeing, you look at our military jets, our F-35, they have a duplicate plane. Looks like the brother of it, exactly the same. Everything we got, they got missiles they can drop out of the sky where we can't stop them, down on targets. They could take out our global GPS satellites in space. We don't have anything like that. They don't have to fire one shot at America. They could destroy us. So China is my punk of the week, and they should straighten their asses out. Otherwise, Trump shouldn't be so nice to them. That's my punk of the week, too. So we agree on something, Carlo.
All right.
Well,
so
thank you.
We bring you these great guests every week.
Thanks so much.
Get the truth out there. Thank you very much to Carter Page, and we'll see you next week.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.